Welcome to Cheques and Balances. I'm Michael Vincent. This is James Blair. And this week we're joined by Matt Harris, the property guru himself, to talk about changes to the Resource Management Act.
Welcome, Guru. Welcome, Managing Director of Lighthouse.
Thanks, James and Mike. I'm glad you didn't call me the Prince of Property because Andy Nick will probably come and hurt me.
I've thrown in the word king a couple
Yeah, I
of
know.
times.
I like it.
Yeah.
I feel like just cutting it out and sending it to him.
So, Matt, occasionally, especially around the election, the word RMA, reforms, it needs to change, blah, 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 has been popped up for a while. National and Labour have teamed up and got a little bit going on. What are these zoning changes that have come through or proposed to be worked through?
Yeah, so probably the largest single change in terms of zoning and density that we've had in as long as I've been a property investor and probably prior to that. In effect, what the government's proposing is changes to the RMA, Resource Management Act, that they're calling the medium density residential standards. In short, what it's going to allow is more intensified development of single house or single zoned housing areas. So if I'm just going to go through it a little bit, you're going to be able to get 4 or more dwellings of up to 3 stories on land without having to go through the resource consent process. Yep. So you still need a building consent. So for people who don't know, when you do changes to your house, most of the time, or do developments, you have to do first a resource consent, then you do a building consent. So the resource consent talks about the land and the effect on the neighbours and height to boundary, things like that. The building consent is more to do with the materials and what you're actually going to do on the land.
Yep.
But it is a process, and it's time consuming and it's costly. So what this will do is allow you to put more dwellings on smaller sections. So you no longer will, if you've got 1,000 square metre section, a single zone area, you might have been able to go through RC and chop that into 2 500 square metre sections. Now you'll be able to go a lot smaller.
Okay, and does this apply for the whole country? Are we going to see, the likes of Kaio, Invercargill, I don't know anywhere else.
I was wondering how far you could go with this.
Are we going to see them chopped up into Coronation Street-esque townhouses everywhere, or?
Well, first of all, I think the most common street name's Marine Parade in New Zealand, so probably we'd start there. No, it doesn't apply countrywide, which I think probably it will eventually, and I think there's an argument that it should be countrywide. So at the moment, it's going to be the main centres, what they consider being the main centres, which is Wellington, Auckland, Hamilton and Christchurch.
Yep.
Which makes sense. They are the biggest population areas in New Zealand. But if we look at Auckland, right, we all live here, and there's a few single zoned housing areas in Auckland, notably in what I would call higher socioeconomic areas, so Remuera, Grayland, parts of Ponsonby, Herne Bay, places like that where you just can't get density, and there's a very good reason for that. And actually, the Golden Triangle, Mount Albert's the funny little outlier that I quite like, which has a lot of these really, really big houses. And Mount Albert is a growing suburb that's quite central. It's the outer link, close to the city, that should be intensified, but it can't be. So I'm going to use that as a little example of how these rules might apply. If you're in Remuera and you're living on 1,000 square metres with a tennis court and a pool, it's very, very unlikely you're going to chop that up and put that into 10 townhouses.
Yeah.
It's even more unlikely your neighbour's going to do it. So I don't see any increase in supply in those areas. Somewhere like Mount Albert, I think probably is more likely, because whilst it does have some really nice areas like the Golden Triangle, the rest of it is quite densely populated and is ripe for development. I think, though, ultimately my overriding view on this is that's a great thing, but I don't think it's going to be the windfall that people expect it to be.
Yeah.
And if I look at so we work with a lot of larger property developers and we know them, they're not looking for these sites anyway. They're buying sites that are already zoned, mixed housing, etc., so that they can put up houses quickly, and they're looking for bigger sites, and they're not looking in Remuera necessarily. They're looking in Te Aratū, Henderson, or Papatoe, Manurewa if you're going the other way. So those people they're not going to drive the prices up at these sites. There will be definitely windfalls for people who have those single zones in the Mount Albert areas who can put up 6 or 7 townhouses now.
Yep.
But otherwise, I think it is an exciting thing because what it signals is the leniency and a move towards less red tape, less costs to build houses, and we all know that the housing affordability drum is getting beaten a lot at the moment, and this is one thing that has the potential to start the cascade towards more affordable housing.
Yep. And with all policy changes and sort of economic changes as well, we get externalities, which is what is the knock-on effects to other parts of the economy, to other areas that perhaps weren't considered in the original planning of the policy. So I guess for this one, we could look at what does that look like for development around the rest of the country while this is only sort of located in, or this policy is only affects the major centres. So any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think there's 2 things that come to mind there. First of all, that councils in New Zealand are under pressure.
Yeah.
They have been for a few years, and there's a number of reasons for that. First of all, the number of building consents getting issued year on year, no matter where you are in New Zealand, is getting higher all the time. But councils aren't necessarily acquiring and retaining new staff.
Yeah.
And if you're a council planner right now and you're working in the council, I don't know what a council planner earns, but I'm going to say maybe $100,000 a year, and you're looking out in the private sector, a property developer's probably going to pay you at least twice that, maybe more. To do the same thing. But if they jump sides and go to the property developer, who's going to be in the the process? The backlog of applications. Just an empty room.
It feels like that sometimes now anyway. So.
And Auckland Council is currently not meeting its RMA requirements to process resource consents and building consents quickly enough, which is quite telling. And when I've mentioned in some other podcasts this interest deductibility thing, what that really does is make new builds more attractive. So on the back of every new build is a minimum of building consent and a resource consent most of the times as well. So there's already pressure on council. So that's one thing that I can see becoming a problem.
Yeah. So that the first negative externality, or probably negative externality there, is the workload on councils, who are traditionally a bottleneck for this sort of stuff anyway, is going to be exaggerated.
Yeah, exactly. So this is a bit double-edged because this is talking about making it easier and less complex, but ultimately people are still going to have to get a building consent for all those sites, so there is more work for the council. The second one is, which I think is interesting, I'm still wrapping my head around it, is, if those sites, which are already probably quite expensive, single zone sites in Auckland and these other areas, go up in value because of this rule change, does that make larger sites that are in the regions that don't have this new legislation more valuable? Probably yes. I think probably does it make land in New Zealand more valuable in general? Probably yes. Because as we all know, the value of land is basically an averages game. It's what everything around it sells for. So suddenly if you've got these, you're already surrounded probably by very expensive houses in most of these areas, and suddenly the value of that piece of land jumps up, or everything else jumps up. So that might be another sort of knock-on effect of it.
Yeah, and it's there's always going to be, I guess, winners and losers with these sorts of things as well. And you sort of alluded to it before, is that the large property developers aren't looking for these sites anyway. So it probably comes down to, I guess, the smaller property developers who are looking to do the smaller developments who will start to snap these up and look for, I'm not going to say bargains because there isn't going to be any bargains in this space, but look to see if there's some way that they can get their hands on these properties.
And can we just talk about Judith Collins and Jacinda Ardern in a room together working this out?
I don't think Judith is going to be in the room
You just need a dusting of Winston Peters in there just to,
probably sitting in the corner.
I mean, I don't want to get into the whole politics thing, but very interesting that National would oppose to it being quite a big election thing, working with the government on this. But that's a completely different thing. But I think you're right, Mike. There will be pockets of opportunities in those kind of inner cities for those who want to play. But as you mentioned, Matt, for those with nicer, bigger houses with you're not just paying for the land, you're paying for the value of the house if you went to knock over the house and put something on there, which we know most developers are looking to build townhouses under the average price in the area. So the math just doesn't stick up.
No.
I just want to jump in for a second because I've just had a thought, and correct me if I'm completely wrong here. I'm fine to be wrong on this one. But does this increase the risk slightly for these developments? And if I look at the what's happening in the wider economy at the moment, and I'm again back to my point of you're going to have smaller developers who are doing these developments. They're going to be further down the pecking order for sort of building materials and these sorts of things. You're going to have delays for the councils, and then you're going to have a piece of land that's costing significantly more than, say, or per square metre perhaps, than, say, some of the other pieces of land where the larger developers who have a bit more beef on the balance sheet can hold it. Are these going to be riskier developments?
I think what you've hit on is probably the type of people that will do them are not going to be developers. They're going to be probably long-term property investors who are going to build 4 or 5 houses on that property, and they're going to hold them all. Or they might only sell one to de-lever, take down a bit of debt, and they'll hold the rest.
Okay.
I think that's probably the market for these sections.
Okay. Well, I'm not happy to be wrong, so I'm going to pretend I was right.
Well, you weren't. You weren't
wrong.
wrong.
I know.
Yeah, I don't think you were wrong at all. I think that there's, without the changes, right, in a market that's performing quite well and more developers popping up, and this encouraging even more developers go under when times are going well because they can't keep up with the cash flow requirements. They don't have the experience they knew in the game, whatever it might be. So it just emphasizes the point as well. If you are, because there's so many advantages of buying new builds, if you're going to buy a new build, make sure you're asking really important questions around, can the developer come back and ask for more money? What is your experience? Can I see what you've built in the past? Feedback from other clients. Is the sunset clause on the contract in favour or against me?
It's funny you mentioned that. I had a client call me 2 days ago. They're a business owner client. One of their staff members has had a sunset clause pulled on a property. Property development is very difficult. It takes time. It costs money. It's a bit of a moving target in terms of materials, and these. And not everyone is reputable and trustworthy. So this particular developer has probably just spent too much. He's taken a little bit longer. He's come into the sunset clauses, and he's just going to let those sunset clauses lapse, and then he's going to resell them all at the current market value. And that is the risk when you buy a new build. And because we've got these rules now that basically incentivise new build development, we've seen a lot of people enter the market and they may not be able to pull it off. So we only, everyone here, we only work with reputable property developers because, yes, you might get your deposit back, but you miss out on the opportunity cost of having done something else and also any potential capital gain that's accrued to you prior to settlement.
Yeah, and it's always that thing where there's a gold rush, there's cowboys, right? And as you open up those changes,
the best quote.
as you open up the changes, you'll get people flooding into the market, and that's where you see these things go wrong.
Michael, well played.
Wow.
Matt, let me ask you one more question before we wrap it up. Around those who, the whole "not in my backyard."
Yes.
Is it the death of that kind of attitude where you stop that high density housing in those suburbs?
I mean, I'd like to say it is, but I don't think it is because people can still go to court and neighbours regularly do, and dare I say it, neighbours in Remuera might have a little more nous on deeper pockets, a little more nous on how to get to court. And I know because we deal with a few property developers, it's quite common for them to get phone calls from angry neighbours and things like that. But I think what it does do is allow people to put these up by right, and therefore over time people they might complain for the first few years, but they probably the Environment Court or whoever they go to do this is going to go, no, well, the RMA allows it, bugger off.
Awesome. Okay, so
but don't do it in my backyard.
You just want to say your street address. Okay, so we're going to wrap it up there. Thank you very much for watching. Please make sure to subscribe. Please make sure to review on Apple, and we'll see you next week.
Cheers.
Thanks.